Evening, everyone. So, we're going to have Brexit tonight. With these live streams, given my propensity for talking about Brexit, I almost never do a live stream on Brexit. I'm going to do one tonight. And I'll tell you why. Because I've been in sort of fairly wistful mood in the last week where Brexit is concerned. So earlier this week, of course, we had Europe Day. Now, Europe Day is not specifically related to the EU, but it's very closely linked because, of course, Europe Day, ultimately, what is it about? It's about European unity. It's about commemorating the last time we were going to have a war between the major European powers. And the EU, of course, is the culmination of the peace project that allowed that to take place. And the official music, of course, of the European Union for decades now. How long are we going back now? Is it like 40 years? Nearly 40 years ago, it was officially stated that the music for the European Union, before the European Union was even a thing, but it was in the planning stages and implementation stages, was going to be Ode to Joy. And would you believe it? It was earlier this week, on the 7th of May, it was the 200th anniversary of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, from which, of course, the Ode to Joy music derives. So, we had 3 days, really. We had the 7th of May, which was the 200th anniversary of the music. And then we had the 8th of May, which was VE Day, also my birthday, but VE Day. And then you have the 9th of May, which is Europe Day. Why does it need a song? Everyone has a song. Everyone has an anthem, don't they? Everyone has an anthem. It's just to play at like ceremonies and things like that. I know the European Union doesn't have a sports team, but you still have like ceremonies and stuff like that where you want some music with it. So everyone has an anthem. All sorts of groups have a bit of an anthem. Anyone that doesn't have an anthem is frankly not even trying. Even World Rugby, like Rugby Union, at least has its own anthem. World in Union, which is also a very nice song. But it just got me into sort of a bit of a funny mood. So, because it occurred to me amongst let's have a look at the latest bad news, because Brexit has just been bad news throughout, hasn't it? If we look at the latest couple of bits of bad news, so we've got Gibraltar. So in order to deal with the difficulty, because Gibraltar's had tough times as a result of Brexit. We're looking like arranging some sort of deal there, which is likely to mean, bizarrely, more sovereignty wins, that UK citizens have a harder time entering Gibraltar than EU citizens. But, I mean, Gibraltar stuck to the side of Spain. So, what's happening as a result of the mad Brexit we had, this mad, insane, extreme Tory Brexit, in order to find pragmatic solutions, what we end up having to do, surprise, surprise, is ceding sovereignty every single time. And that is because sovereignty is not this like treasure to be guarded jealously. It's a commodity, really. When you come to an agreement with anything on any level, you sign an agreement with the bank for something, you get a mortgage, say, you're effectively ceding sovereignty. You are saying, in return for this, I will, be bound by these obligations. So what is happening in order for us to what we're finding, basically, and this is the Conservative government, this is the Brexit government that's doing this. What they're finding is that sovereignty is not actually as valuable as you may think, or the sovereignty that they are talking about. So we're finding pragmatic solutions to things which involve taking on certain obligations in order to get certain benefits. And this is ultimately what's happening in Gibraltar. And obviously at the end of it, the benefits are always still less. I mean, this is the madness of Brexit for me. The benefits are less than we had as full members of the EU. and yet the sovereignty we're ceding is greater than we ceded as full members of the EU. So what we're getting for like weaker freedoms is higher cost, weaker freedoms, and yet we'll still pay them. Even the Conservatives will still pay them because it still works out better off. And then the other one, actually, I've sneaked the little quote. Just below it, there's a tweet from Bruges Group, by the way. If you don't know those, they're Brexit lunatics. And it says, negotiations over Gibraltar are taking place behind closed doors and with minimal oversight from MPs. Yeah. And do you know what? MPs can demand oversight if they want. They don't want to. So think about that. When we talk about the fact, we've talked about this with trade deals. MPs should have paid much more careful attention to our trade deals. They didn't. They chose not to. Tory MPs chose to give the government the power to do these deals behind closed doors so as not to create fuss. And I'll tell you something else. The next Parliament will do the same. When it's a majority of Labour MPs, they are not going to want to draw attention to it either, but for different reasons. And then, of course, we had the Paul Scully wrote, or he did something for GB News. Beware a second referendum as older voters die off, leaving Generation Z to pick up the result. It's not quite true. Obviously, there's going to be lots of different generations there. But when you consider it was the younger generations that were more likely to vote Remain, and indeed did vote Remain, the balance is shifting all the time. And then the other one above my head. So the latest phase of standards controls are in, and we're getting now delays. This one, this is Dover and Hull, which is not too far from me. And the quote here, this is from Lodestar. So this is a journal for the logistics industry, which I subscribe to. I never needed to subscribe it before Brexit, of course. We have multiple HGVs being held at Dover and at Hull, and HMRC stroke DEFRA seemingly do not know how to release them. The broker told the Lodestar. So remember, broker, this is a professional. This isn't someone who hasn't been used to these systems or anything like that, and they're not know what's. This is someone who does deal with this. So they dealt with it before Brexit. They just never had to deal with it for Britain to EU trade. Absolutely mad what we're facing. But it occurs to me this may be peak Brexit. In other words, what we're experiencing now, and the fallout from these standards controls are going to continue through summer, and they'll, it's not like they disappear. I mean, Keir Starmer this week has said the Rwanda flights will stop the day he's Prime Minister. He can't say anything about that to do with Brexit because, that will take longer. But we could be at a position where Brexit is as bad as it's going to be now. And it could well be that after this year, that 2024 ends up being peak Brexit. And after this year, at the end of each year, so at the end of 2025, because at the end of 2024, Brexit will be worse than it was at the beginning of 2024. Whereas, hopefully, at the end of 2025, because it'd be quite good at the end of a year to do a retrospective specifically on Brexit. At the end of this year to say, right, where are we with Brexit? What improvements have we had? What extra downsides have we had? And then at the end of each year say, right, has there been a net improvement? What's improved? What's got worse? Has there been a net improvement? And I think after this year, Phil's voice is Bluetooth to a speaker inside an acoustic guitar breaking it in. Is there something wrong with my speaker? I can't check anything just now, by the way. But yeah, that's what I'm hoping. Anyway, I'm going to go through, because earlier on there were some good questions. There were a couple of non-Brexit questions. I've tried to make a note of a couple of good ones, but do ask them at the end. I don't go on about the single topic all the way through the stream. But there were a couple of Brexit ones as well. Now I've forgotten. Let me try and find them. There's one here that says, hi there, Phil. What can Starmer's Labour do to address key worker shortages and HGV drivers from the EU? So, in terms of what... I don't know what they will do, by the way. I'm not going to now describe a load of Labour policies. In terms of what they could do. but not all of these would be politically easy, so I'm not saying they will. When it comes to like freedom of movement type arrangements, we know that that is still a bit of a political hot potato. I'm just going to get rid of this for now. But in theory, what we could do, what is the barrier to people from the EU working in the UK right now? Restrictions on movement. Having to apply for visas to work in the UK, or for lorry drivers having to come into the UK, being held up and now for extra hours and being charged a load of extra money. You know, for the common user charge, for example, which is the charge that they have to now pay for checks. So for the checks to be carried out. And that is coming to hundreds of pounds for a lorry load. Sometimes that could be quite a bit more. What could we do? We could have, because obviously a lot of the things that we'd want to do are going to require negotiation because we want it to be reciprocal. So Labour are going to want to embark on a load of things that are reciprocal. Now, in terms of what you could do quickly, you could remove the requirement for or to make it much easier. The problem is, like, if you've got a worker in Belgium, right, and you're trying to attract them to work in the UK, even if you had a nice, easy visa process, it's like, great, but that Belgian worker doesn't need to do that to work in France or Germany or Italy or somewhere like that. So even if we make the visa system simple, even if we add a load more occupations, for example, to the shortage occupation list, we're still going to have, it's still going to be more hassle for someone in the EU, unless they're Irish, because we have common travel area, so that's fine. But for someone on the continent in the EU, we're still making it harder for them to work in Britain than it is literally any other country in Europe, or virtually every other country in Europe. We could remove that visa requirement. We could say, we'll just remove that. The problem with that then is that you have removed a trade barrier for the EU without getting it reciprocated, because it will take time to get something reciprocated with a lot of negotiating. And we would give away our hand, would give away our access. So that is the problem. There are things that we can unilaterally do, but if we do them, then we remove bargaining chips for future negotiations. And the EU are already not, they're already a little bit sick of Brexit. I know some people say, oh, they can't be asked doing any discussions with Brexit at all. I mean, that's not true. The EU are used to negotiating with everyone all the time anyway. But there is an extent to which, yeah, I'm quite sure they're a bit sick of us. In terms of lorries getting to and from, not a lot. Like the time is caused by checks that are needed. The checks have to take place. Obviously, the outbound checks are still going to take place because the EU don't want to compromise their own market. But we don't want to compromise ours. So the checks that are now taking place, which are quite low level, it's not in Labour's interest to stop them, because then if they stop them and then something bad happens, they'll be for it. That'll be it. Their reputation will be down the toilet. You know, they're coming into power on a reputation of competence. So they can't take the checks away. We don't have the capacity to have those checks take place properly without... You know, we've got lorries stuck for hours at a time. Hours. At the likes of Sevington, which is our only... Sevington, for those who don't know, is the only checking facility we have in the whole country that runs 24/7. So there are some other checking facilities, but they're only open at certain times. So if you're trying to arrive with a load outside of those times, sorry, you can't maybe... Like, what? No. So it's the only 24/7 checking facility, but they still don't have the... It's like one in the whole country. But there we go. More to the point, why would any EU workers opt to come to the UK when we're severely behind in many aspects of the other European countries? No appeal aside from maybe family ties. Well, I mean, you say that, and yet there are people who choose to work here and like working here. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people choose to work in other country. It could be because they speak English, and they just want to improve those English skills. They may like the country. I know. If you look at our government and our media, it makes it sound like it's the most awful place on earth to be. But most places are not that bad. If you exist on social media, for example, in the political Twitter sphere, it sounds really horrible place to be, Britain. But most of the time, it's quite nice. It's just don't read the news. And don't listen to any politicians, and it's still not bad, but it is just now much harder to live here, because people aren't, someone in Belgium is not free to just go, I'm just going to go and work in Britain now. They have to apply for visas, but there we go. So when Angry Pagan's asking me a question he asked repeatedly yesterday in the Labour Social stream, it's quite cunning. It's quite cunning, this one. I will, just for the cheekiness, I'll read it out. It says, have Labour talked about any specific green tech projects they want to back? Tidal energy, expansion of online solar and wind farms, maglev. Could they use this as part of the realignment with the EU? So, sneaky little Brexit angle there. So Labour will have projects that they are planning on. I don't necessarily know what they all are. The whole point of Great British Energy, which is going to be taking up quite a bit of their initial green investment, the whole point of it is specifically to invest in green energy production. And yes, that is likely to mean working internationally. So it could indeed be used as a way of fostering better EU relations. Because inevitably, these projects are not all going to be by British companies. They're going to have a priority. I mean, Keir Starmer makes a lot of the, buy British mantra. So they're obviously going to seek to at least have companies have their base of operations located here. But inevitably, I mean, if you've got a Swedish company that's developed some really interesting technology, and we want to get in on it, yeah, of course we're going to be working with those. So in terms of trade delegations that work across borders, I do think there's going to be more scope for that, certainly, yes. Hang on, someone said something here. I don't think this can be right. Let me just read it properly. I'm not sure, Ivan, that that's correct. I'll read it out. I think I know what you're referring to, and I think you may have misunderstood. It says, before the UK left the EU, the European Court of Justice ruled that if the UK ever rejoined, the previous opt-outs of not joining the Euro and Schengen would be reinstated. No, I think what you've misunderstood. There was a court case. It was absolutely... What that court case was for was not us rejoining. We were still in the EU at the time. You've said that yourself in your comment. What that court case was saying was, because we'd started the Article 50 process, so we'd sort of committed ourselves to leaving. Someone asked the European Court of Justice, if we cancelled it now, do we get to retain all of our opt-outs? And the answer was yes. So it wasn't a question about if we leave and then rejoin, can we have them back? It was, if we stop leaving, can we retain them? So I think you've misunderstood that one there. No, if we go back, we're going back as if we were never an EU member. The EU membership's gone. It's finished. Gone. Doesn't exist. It's as if it never existed. And everything's changed. Everything, even the official English that's used in the EU is now Irish English rather than British English. So everything is gone. So if we rejoin, we are rejoining from scratch, and everything, every process that anyone else would have to follow, we would have to follow as well. We can try and negotiate opt-outs, and we're a large economy. We'd probably get something. There may be some opt-outs that are not a big deal. I keep saying, when it's about. I have actually, Matthew, clipped that question, but because it's not a Brexit one, I'll try and remember to do it at the end. But do remind me in about 15 minutes or so. The damn, forgot what I was saying now. Yeah, sorry, forgotten. Maybe it'll come back to me in a moment. Going to go out on a limb and claim a referendum on rejoining 2032. By that time, it will have been 16 years since the last one. Starr will have been PM for 8 years, and Victor will be a swan song. Well, I strongly suspect we're talking post-Starmer here, but I don't know how long. Because, you know, any Prime Minister, even if he doesn't make an almighty cock-up, wouldn't... You can only last so long in politics, really. We will see. It wouldn't do any good to try and... wouldn't do any good to try and keep a leader for too long anyway. And no one can remain an asset for that long unless they're there's been a few political leaders in history that have been that remarkable. I don't think Keir Starmer's personality is going to allow him to be such a beast. But there we go. So, but you know, it's just inevitable, isn't it? We're already at some point this year, I think a statistician has actually sort of worked out. You have to model it because we obviously don't know. It's anonymous how you voted in the Brexit referendum. So we know the age breakdown. We know various other demographic breakdowns of who voted Leave and who voted Remain. So you can't say for certain, but just modelling it statistically, at some point this year, I'm told, we will have as many people alive today that voted Leave as voted Remain, because a lot more Leave voters than Remain voters have died off, just statistically. So after this year, for every year that we advance, there are more statistically, and this, unfortunately, no one's really shouting about this. We need people to shout about this. There will be more people alive that voted Remain than voted Leave. And then you add two more things into the mix. The first of which is that more younger people are old enough to vote, and that's actually going to, you know, there's going to be a little bit of a big boost in that, because remember, like if you go back to the referendum for Scottish independence in 2014, so you were allowed to vote on that if you were 16 or older. Why? Because in Scotland you can vote 16 or over. So as soon as Labour make it so that UK-wide, and I know, actually I don't know, I'm just thinking, I know the policy, I'm mostly thinking about the general election, but surely it will then be the case that 16-year-old plus will be able to vote in anything, an 18-year-old would. So we're suddenly going to have a load of people who that would include being able to vote in a UK-wide referendum. Because you could be 16 and vote in the Scottish independence referendum, but you had to be 18 to vote in the Brexit referendum because that was UK-wide. So as soon as the voting age is 16, so there's going to be, you know, there's already more young people getting to voting age with every passing year, and they are mostly pro-EU. So the population is going to tend towards it. Now, the problem we have in this country is our electoral system doesn't really take account of majority public opinion. So if I just show you a couple of charts on Brexit attitudes. So the one at the top is the latest on, do people think we should have, it's basically asking if the UK had, I'll read it out. If the UK had to adopt the euro, how do you think you would vote if there was a referendum on EU membership tomorrow? Stay out or rejoin the EU? Now, and you can see this trend. This trend, by the way, just goes back to the start of this year. So it's not like going years or anything like that. And you can see it's divergent at the moment. It did converge in sort of March. But by and large, there's a slight lead on staying out. The blue is staying out. Rejoin is green. But there's not much of a gap. And I'll tell you something else about these polls as well. I actually think they slightly favour I think they slightly favour the Brexit side of an argument, because I have a real issue with the only pollster I know that takes account of false recall is YouGov, because they produced a piece on it. So I assume they act on it. The problem with a lot of pollsters is, in order to work out their sample, they ask you various questions, and one of them is, how did you vote, remain or leave? And they use that to try and make sure that their sample is representative of the general population. Now, obviously, there'll be some people who didn't vote at all because they were too young, or just didn't vote at all. The problem is that some of the answers they will get, if they ask that now, are false. There'll be some people who voted leave who will now say they voted remain. Technically vice versa as well, because there's a lot of people who were not that definite about their choice of vote. And they some people did it like toss of a coin or something like that, or just on the day of the poll itself. And YouGov have tested this out, because they've been going around a long time. So they have got people, and they've asked people how they voted just after a poll. And then they did a study once where they asked them 2 years later how they voted. I think this was for the general election, but the same applies to the Brexit referendum as well. And they found that, and it was a lot of people. It wasn't just a few percent. It was a big chunk of people said something different. So either they were lying on one of the occasions they were asked, or more likely, because why would you lie in an anonymous poll? More likely they just forgot. And I think, because if you ask people now how they vote, because a lot of people, didn't really say much about it. If you ask them, a lot of people's brains will allow them to think they voted remain than when they actually voted leave. So I actually think often with these polls, it might skew it slightly towards the Brexit side. But either way, with each passing year, we are going to have more and more people who are going, yeah, we should go back. Now, it's like any other policy. This is why it's important to use the poll that specifically asks about the euro. Because because you'll see polls, there's 60 or 70% of people think we should rejoin the EU. That's waving a magic wand policy. Those polls are always rubbish, really. Oh, do you agree with this policy? Yeah. Do you agree with it when you've been told the trade-offs? Because then all of a sudden a lot of people don't. You can say to people, should we have this policy outcome? And a load of people go, yeah, that sounds good. Should we have it if it has this cost attached to it? No. So that's what this shows. So that's why I look at this poll. And then the bottom poll, by the way, because you probably won't be able to read it unless you're watching this on a monitor, this is just purely about Brexit regret. So the black is those who think it was a mistake leaving the EU. The blue is those who think we were still right to leave even now, and the grey is just those who don't know. And this is just where it is. You can see it's not. It did widen a great deal. Now it's fairly static, suggesting that any people who are going to change their minds have probably already changed their minds. We're probably not going to get more people changing their minds, so we'll probably have to come to terms with that. And I'll say that for two reasons. First of all, this polling sort of shows it fairly static, so there's no reason from this polling to suggest that there's going to be some change. And then the other way I look at it is, what we want to happen and what I expect to happen is Labour are going to start reversing aspects of Brexit and making it. So this is what I said at the start. I think every year after this year, at the end of the year, we're going to be able to reflect that Brexit is not as damaging. Well, if it's less damaging, you're going to get fewer people thinking, if they weren't already thinking it was a mistake at peak damage, at ground zero of Brexit, which is probably where we are now, then they're not going to think so in a couple of years' time. So it is really about, can we now narrow the gap between those who'd say we should rejoin the EU if there were no downsides or no trade-offs, and those who say even with the trade-offs we should still rejoin. So that's what we want to do, really close that gap there. But there we go. And the other thing to note as well, so the huge problem we have at the moment one of the biggest problems that we have is the Conservative Party still, even after the election, because some people are saying, well, you know, why don't Labour at least just say that they know they can't promise to rejoin the EU, but why can't they at least say that should be our direction of travel? Two reasons. Like some people will note, for example, Professor John Curtis has said, he's talked about the fact that overwhelmingly people who are going to vote Labour are Remain. Even now, it's not just the 2019 cohort. Even now, the vast majority of people who are going to vote Labour are pro-EU and think we should rejoin. But my question there is, but Labour cannot, because I think Curtis suggested 75%. So I'm not going to disagree with him. But then you think to yourself, but Labour can't afford to just retain those 75% of voters. They need all of them. I mean, at the moment, with Labour getting 100% of the votes, they still, you know, to crush the Tories properly, still want more, or for other parties to get more. They want the Tories to get fewer votes at least. But the other problem is that while the Conservatives remain the default choice to replace that Labour government, and while they maintain a position of when we come back to power, any moves towards reversing Brexit we will scrap, the EU are going to be reluctant to do anything that requires major resources. Now, they'll probably sort of know that the Conservatives aren't going to be upset at any improvements in the deal that keeps us outside of the single market, customs union and membership itself. But they're not going to engage in any talks on EU membership, say, if the Conservatives are saying, well, we could be back in power in a few years and we'll just wreck the whole process. That is a waste of their time. So, and in fact, it's actually a condition of actually, even this, just the start of it, just actually the application process. One of the conditions is stable institutions. Well, one of the most important institutions in the whole process is the government. And what that means is you need any government now and in the foreseeable future to be in favour of the application. And the Conservatives will say they are not. So what do you do about this? You have to either destroy them as a political force, and that unfortunately would have to take you. Even if we beat the Tories down to 10 seats, it doesn't mean that they couldn't come screaming back. Or we have to get the Conservatives to agree that we should rejoin, which is actually not as difficult as it may sound. At the moment, they're going through their Brexit phase. They're about to go through a much harder Brexit phase. And maybe the Conservative Party will just turn into UKIP and that'll be that. And maybe that's it. Maybe the so-called, the sort of John Major Conservative Party, maybe that'll be gone forever. I don't know. But if not, at some point you would think Conservatives will realise that they have to start being realistic. As long as Labour can actually deliver in government, the Conservatives eventually will have no choice but to start to get real. And that will have to mean confronting their Brexit demons. Now, the benefit there is for those who may think, oh, they'll never do it. In 5 years' time, or certainly in 10 years' time, the people in charge of the Conservative Party will not be the ones in charge now. The ones who were in charge, well, not the ones who the ones who will be in charge after the election, they will, if they're still in opposition in 10 years' time, they will have failed. So they'll get rid of a phase of failures. And what will happen is the people who are sort of on the sidelines who want to go at it, they'll have a go. They'll fail as well. So once you've got rid of all the failures, then the people who will be coming to the fore will be the ones who are not associated with that failure at all. Like the current Labour front bench, there's a few in it who were part of the last Labour government. But they weren't, you know, it's not much. It's largely a new look. So there we go. I doubt the EU will let the UK rejoin the EU. Rejoin until we've got rid of first past the post. Well, you see, that goes hand in hand. I mean, people will know that I want that. That's my top policy priority because so many other policies are much easier to implement with that. electoral reform is the best way of moving the Conservative Party to accepting that we should rejoin the EU in many ways. And it's certainly in the interests of moving the Labour Party there, because you then know with proportional representation, any sort of more representative system, you don't have to try and fit together this, what they keep calling a broad church. You know, you're going to have more young people involved in the process because I think there could be, like, do people actually know, the Office for National Statistics published a survey this week which notes that, you know, lots and lots of young people, unsurprisingly, by the way, but we've now got data, do not think that our current electoral system is free or fair. You know, and they're two very different things. So if you there's a real impetus there to create a different system. And that should hopefully engage a lot more young people, because one of the big problems we have is there's a positive correlation between age and proportion of people voting. So if we could get young people vote, and it used to be, this wasn't always the case, by the way. This has got nothing to do with people getting more serious about politics as they get older. In fact, we can see that young people are serious about politics from, talking about the protests at universities in both the UK and Britain and other countries as well. But those protests were always there. I protested at university. Protests have been going on. You know, you look at any period of history, of modern history, post-war history, and whatever there was a protest against, university students were protesting. So young people have always protested against things. So they are already politically engaged. They're just not using their voice because they don't think it's making any impact. And it's a vicious circle, because there are a lot of young people that vote, but there's nowhere near as many as older people. So lots of young people don't vote because they feel they're not being listened to. And then politicians are going, well, why would I listen to you? Because you're not voting. You know, you don't have to vote for that politician, but they need to know your vote's up for grabs in order to pay more attention to you. So you have this vicious cycle created, which you might break if we change the electoral system, because all you need is an act of faith. You just need young people to go, maybe this will be the thing. More young people vote. Parties then look at that and go, oh, more young people are voting now. Realign policies to take account of that. You know, it could do so much. And it's and that's just with any change to the system, even if it was a sidestep. If you just change the system in a way that wasn't actually fundamentally better, you may still get an act of faith and lots more people voting. But if you also make it better, then they're much more likely to be happy with the process as well. Not certain, but, you know, much happier. But there we go. Because we do have this mad system. I mean, first past, I would argue our first past the post system is not as mad as America's. But at the same time, what we have is a system that can only work in a two-party system, but we don't have a two-party system. We have lots of, and we never really have. Even, you know, when it was just like the Tories and the Whigs, and then eventually the Conservatives and the Liberals, and now the Conservatives and Labour. There's always been something else. Oh, it's Conservatives and Liberals, then Conservatives and Labour. There's always been something else, hasn't there? Can't articulate a bit of, I'm not keen on having the euro, and at the same time I know it doesn't really matter. I wonder what people see as a good reason not to adopt it. There are genuinely good reasons not to adopt the euro, because we had a chance to adopt the euro when we had what was probably the most pro-EU government we've ever had under Blair and Brown, and, you know, Brown didn't want to join it. There are good reasons for a government to want to retain control of monetary policy. And I know in theory you'll say, Phil, it's the Bank of England that control monetary policy. It's like, yeah, they do. Okay. and it was Labour that made them independent. However, how independent can you really be when the government meets with you every week and make appointments or make the most senior appointments? So who is it who appoints the governor of the Bank of England, Chancellor of the Exchequer? Who is it that meets the governor of the Bank of England every week, just like the Prime Minister meets the reigning monarch, the Chancellor of the Exchequer? So although in theory, the Bank of England has independent control of monetary policy, in reality, the government are breathing down their neck. So there is a benefit in basically having that, and of course you can take that control away from the Bank of England whenever you like. So there are advantages. It is, so it is worth negotiating. It's worth. So I mean, I've said this in the past, and I'll repeat it. If I was to advise on how we organise another referendum, it would be as follows. First of all, I'd say we're doing this properly, and there will be 2 referenda. That's what you're voting for. You're voting for 2. So I would say to the public, when you voted last time, you gave the government a blank cheque to do whatever they liked. And look what happened. It was a disaster. We're not making the same mistake. The legislation that is used to create the referendum will have 2. One is, the first referendum is just your permission to negotiate. That's it. It's not your permission for us to join the EU. You don't give us that mandate. It is just permission to begin negotiations with a view to joining. And then if the government of the day comes to an agreement that it believes is in the best interests of the British people, there will then by law be a second referendum on whether the public agree with the terms of the membership. And that way you can say to people, the default situation is that members of the EU, as soon as they are reasonably able to do so, adopt the euro and get rid of their own currency. However, we will attempt to negotiate an opt-out on that. And what could be really helpful, and I think they would as well, the EU Commission could also say, we'd be totally fine considering that. They don't have to say anything definite, of course, but they could just give a little crumb and say, we're okay talking about that. Because every country, even small countries like Moldova, it's like there's it's not like joining a gym. Are you going to sign up to all these conditions? No, I don't like that one. Well, you can't join the gym then, bug off. There is a negotiating period for everyone. So everyone can get opt-outs. You just have to make sure it's just a bit of give and take. Now, it may well be that most of the rest of the Eurozone doesn't want us in there anyway. Because, think about it this way. When we were in the EU before, because we weren't part of the Euro, that also meant we didn't monkey about with anything to do with the Euro. So when it came to anything to do with any monetary policy on the Euro, we didn't interfere. It may be that other countries would prefer it if we didn't interfere. So it might be that we can negotiate, but maybe we can. Maybe we can. Andrew Bailey was appointed because he was pro-Brexit. Look how bad he is. Yeah, I wouldn't say he's awful, but he was not. Yeah, you're right. He was not the best pick. He was picked by Boris Johnson specifically because he said, "Oh yeah, Brexit, brilliant." He basically did a David Frost. What are we more likely to have to adopt to reply again, Euro or Schengen? Schengen's quite interesting. It's very difficult to say because we'd need to know, because we're not thinking about where the UK is right now. Where the UK is now, we're not fit to apply. So we're trying to think in the future, hopefully not too far in the future, what will tip the balance? Will it just be a change in the electoral system? Will it be some attitude changes to freedom of movement? Because Schengen is another big one. So although I say I look at this poll, that's because this poll exists. I don't know how many polls exist. I've not seen real polls that do it regularly that talk about Schengen as well. Obviously, we could only join Schengen if Ireland wanted to as well. I'm not aware of what Ireland's view on that is, but I don't think they'd have any objection. I mean, does anyone know, do Ireland actually want to join Schengen? Is it just us that's stopping it? Or is it that they're not keen either? Because if Ireland's not keen, then it's a non-starter. Of course, we have to have that opt-out back, because either until Ireland reunifies, either the UK and Ireland are both out of Schengen or both in Schengen. You can't have half and half. How can we rejoin the common market? So the single market, we would call it now. So that's another interesting question. So in terms of the three bits, you've got EU membership, customs union, single market. The process for joining the EU there is a process. It's very complex and takes a lot of time, right? You're talking like 10 years, aren't you? And at the moment, that's not on the cards to even begin. The customs union is relatively straightforward in many ways, in that it's really easy to negotiate a customs union with the EU, and we should be able to do that. I don't know if there are political difficulties there, because again, and this is what I really genuinely don't know, because I was really annoyed when Labour said we'd rule out the customs union as well, because I thought, there is an argument against it, but not if the direction of travel is close to the EU anyway. But if the Conservatives say, if you join a customs union, we'll leave it as soon as we come back to power, if that's enough to get the EU to say, yeah, we can't be arsed then that might be a reason. I don't know what's been said behind closed doors. But the single market is the piggy in the middle, because there is no process for joining the single market on its own. There are, at the moment, there are two ways to join the single market. You can either join EFTA. EFTA don't want us, and to be honest, that's not good for us anyway. Or you can join the EU. Well, that's back to the first problem. However, as some people will know, I am quite excited about the proposal from Macron, which has been supported by Germany as well now, for a sort of two-tier membership of the EU. So, because it's not just for quite a lot of the time, there was always, people talked about this friction between the UK and the EU, because our interest was effectively mercantile. We were sick of our economy being crap. We were sick of like Italy, Germany and France and Spain, come to that, doing better than us, relatively speaking, in terms of direction of travel. So we joined for that reason. We know that. That's the reason we joined. And it's the same reason we join again. All of the arguments, like there's lots of arguments on the social side of things to join, but ultimately it's going to be economic arguments that are made. That's why I spend most of my time on economic arguments. It's what people will respond to. It's really what people respond to. But there's also a lot of aggro with Eastern European countries as well, like the old Soviet countries, because they're like the UK. Their interest in joining the EU was being part of the single market. They are less bothered about the social project, because they tend to be more conservative countries. They tend to have more of a right-wing bias. Some of them are more right-wing than the UK, but but there's a strong conservative political elements to a lot of these countries, and they're not really that bothered about the peace process or social liberalism or anything like that. So, and they cause a bit of aggro. Hungary is causing a great deal of aggro. Poland was causing a great deal of aggro until Tusk won again, but the pendulum will swing back the other way as well. And there are a couple of other countries as well. So the idea is you have a two-tier system where you have your inner membership, which are the people who see the EU as an economic and a social project, and then an outer tier of people who want the economic benefits, single market access, but they don't have as many political obligations. So obviously this is just in the talking stages, and nothing is, there's no final plan or anything. But I can see this ending up being effectively like you're a member of the single market without being a member of EFTA, but you don't have to adopt all the like political side of it, and a reorganisation like that. And part of the driving force for this is not actually places like Hungary, although I think it would benefit that. It's actually for helping Ukraine, because and it's not just done for Ukraine, but Ukraine is a huge linchpin of European peace at the moment, being honest. But the problem with Ukraine is although it's okay, it's got this fast track accession thing. Ukraine is a very long way away from being fit for EU membership. Yes, it is very pro EU. The will is there, the spirit is there, but Ukraine's the same as all these other ex-Soviet countries. It has political attitudes which are not the same as the Western European countries. So politically they're not ready. I mean, obviously they're literally not ready at the moment because they've been invaded. But even if you kick Russia out, they're still not ready politically. So the idea is to have... but you don't want Ukraine sat outside the EU for a very long time while it gets itself ready, because then you run the risk of people getting sick of the bureaucratic process and then deciding, actually, no, sod you, you're all being too difficult with your demands. So you have this second tier thing, which says economic benefits, come join us for the economic benefits, probably part of the single market. You have to obviously adopt all the rules of the single market, but you don't have to align yourselves politically. Obviously, there will be a trade-off, because if you don't want to be a full member, you're not going to be deciding all of the rules of that single market as well, but you will get the benefit. So that's how I see it panning out, but we don't know. But that is the only way, because at the moment, like I said, at the moment, there's only 3 ways to join the single market. You either join the EU fully, even if we were to announce we were going to do that tomorrow, it would take about 10 years, and we're not politically in any position to do that. The second is join EFTA. Same thing, we're not going to do that. And EFTA wouldn't have us. I mean, I don't think they wouldn't have us. And the third is to ask the EU and EFTA for a special arrangement for us to join the single market as a special case. And do note that EFTA's treaty with the EU means that EFTA would have a say in that as well. They could veto that. EFTA members could veto it. So it's like joining the EU, ironically, is easier than joining the single market on its own. Because to join the EU, we just have to persuade the current members of the EU to agree. But to join the single market on its own as a special deal, we would have to agree with all the EU members and all the EFTA members. Yeah, so there we go. Right, there were a couple of questions at the beginning, which I'd like to go through as we're coming towards the end, if I can find them. Oh, here they go. Which aren't Brexit related. So one was on thoughts on Lammy saying that Labour are willing to work with the Trump administration. They should form a united front with the EU against the US. So Labour have been very, very clear that their top foreign policy priority is the EU. So when Labour do win, David Lammy will be the first British Home Secretary in history to prioritise European relations over American relations, or certainly in anything like modern history. I'm not going to go back 300 years. Not that I could go back 300 years. The USA wasn't around then. But but in terms of this against Trump, try and consider what you're saying. If Trump becomes president, we know he's a Putin asset. We know he's a Putin shill, right? What Lammy is saying is he is going to at least try and delay any precipitous moves to remove aid for Ukraine. Try and think about what happened a couple of weeks ago when Congress finally passed that bill for funding, amongst other things, for Ukraine, for Ukraine's defense. Now, imagine a scenario where Trump just says that's never happening again. It's all gone, finished. That would be it was fairly catastrophic that it was delayed for so long. Imagine it never been there. Europe is not going to be able to step up that quickly. I think it should have been doing so a long time ago. I think as soon as Trump became president in the first place, that Europe should have taken the threat to European security much more seriously than they did. I think that, in fact, quite frankly, I think Europe has collectively procrastinated in the same way that Brexiteers did. When they knew that they should have been getting ready for Brexit and they didn't, I see Europe as doing the same thing here. So Lammy is going to have to work, and he won't work with Trump, obviously, because Trump's the president. It'll be Starmer that has to work with Trump. But we have to work with the US. We have to try and persuade them where we can. And I will say this. I don't know whether you've seen this. We have a much better chance of doing so than the Conservatives, because someone, I've forgotten his name now, but someone who's close to Trump actually said he'd rather talk to Labour, a Labour government, than the Conservative government. And do you know why? It's because when David Cameron went over there, he pissed everyone off. He went over there all smug and superior, you know, and he rubbed everyone's nose, the wrong way. Whereas Lammy has been engaged, and he's quite well known on Capitol Hill, you know, but he's been engaging diplomatically. He's not gone over there and said, right, you thick bastards, this is what you need to do, blah, 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 blah. Can you stop listening to Marjorie Taylor Greene? She's a cretin. Do this. So he's actually gone over there and gone, okay, so how can we work together, basically? So then they'll be much keener to as well. That's diplomacy. That's what you have to do. It's absolutely mental when Ukraine is so dependent on American aid, effectively military aid. It is absolutely insane to suggest that as soon as Trump, I mean, I don't think Trump is going to win, by the way, but you cannot rule it out. You have to prepare. I don't think that it would be at all sensible to say, right, we have to give up on the United States now, because that's giving up on Ukraine. And then Russia's not happy with just Ukraine. It's already at the moment threatening other countries around it. It thinks it is getting ready for a Trump presidency. It's getting ready for a Trump presidency. So it is imperative that as many Western countries as possible can at least act as a brake on what Trump might do, because Uncle Vlad rings him up and says, Donald, me old China, can you stop supplying Ukraine? They're all Nazis, you know. But there we go. Oh, sorry, it goes back to a Brexity one here. EFTA have brought useful benefits for its members, but not as good as EU, lagging behind as far less clout. I mean, that's my view as well. But I mean, if a country is happy with that, again, it's each country has to decide that balance of, you know, whenever you form any international agreement, yes, you cede some sovereignty, but you then get benefits. My big problem with Brexit, apart from all the others, is that what's happened since the hard Brexit is the actual Brexit bloody government has had to make pragmatic decisions. And every time it has done so, it has ended up conceding more sovereignty than we ever conceded as an EU member, and at the same time for less benefit. You know, and everything, like even the small stuff, that UKCA mark nonsense, which we're basically now dropping. So it's like, so we're now going to carry on with the CE mark. But do we have a say in what the CE standards are? No, we don't. We have no say in what those... We're going to adopt them, but we have no say in the whole process of getting a CE mark. And it's going to be more costly, because you can't actually... A British manufacturer cannot actually register for a CE mark in Britain. You have to do it in the EU. So British manufacturers, to be able to, you know, have the CE mark registration, they need something, an office or something. They need some presence in the EU to be able to do that, to file the paperwork. So we're conceding sovereignty because the British government now has no say in how the CE mark process works, and it's more costly for businesses because they have to set up something in another bloody country. And the same thing is for everything. The Windsor Framework, the final implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, we get certain benefits. We've had to concede certain sovereignties. Look at the latest. In order to get the DUP to restore power sharing in Stormont, what did they do? He said, oh, because what was happening is this not for EU labelling. So any manufacturer in Britain that wanted to supply a business in Northern Ireland, like with food, like say, ready meals or something, had to have the not for EU mark on it so it could be sold in, say, Belfast, right? Now, what the DUP were complaining about is there's some British manufacturers saying that costs too much. We're not going to do that just for one shop in Belfast. So we just won't supply you because it's too expensive. So the concession he won from Rishi Sunak was to go, okay, we're going to make all British producers put the not for EU mark on it, even if it's only for sale in Britain. We're going to make them all do it. So now, it's more cost again. It's less sovereignty because we're now having to make sure that we put those labels on stuff that has zero chance of going to the EU because it's only going to be sold in Britain. And we're going to pay more for it. We're going to make small businesses have to pay for the labelling, even if they never supply Northern Ireland. Everything you look at what the government have done to try and make Brexit a bit easier, because it's like they did this really hard Brexit. It's like they all got pissed one night and did something really amazingly stupid. And now they're trying to, without making themselves look, because they don't want to look stupid, right? They don't want the I told you so. So they're now trying to rein back where they can. And every time they do, it ends up being expensive or more expensive than it was in the EU, or conceding greater sovereignty for lower benefit, less benefit. Mad. Absolutely mad. Yeah, and EFTA, James saying that EFTA members in the EA don't have a vote on the rules, only EU members, which they should change. Well, what you think EFTA members should have change them? No, if EFTA members want a say in the rules, they can. They do have a say in who joins the single market, which is why we would need their permission as well. But no, they shouldn't have a say on the rules. If you want a say in the rules, you'd be an EU. You've got to have the carrot and stick. It's like EFTA members have decided that it's in their national interests overall. On balance, everything's a trade-off. On balance, they've decided that it's better not to be in the EU. That way, they don't have to follow the political alignment. But the trade-off to that is that they also don't get a say in the market rules either. I mean, you've got to have your trade-offs. That politics is all about trade-offs, which is why it annoys me when you have polls that will say something like, oh, should we do this policy like? And it's like, but you have to mention the trade-off. Otherwise, you end up with people going, look, 70% of people want this thing. Now ask them with the trade-off. Oh, it's down to 40% now. Okay. Maggie reckoning peak Brexit is still 5 years away, I'm afraid. Well, that was a downer. We will see. We will see. I am more optimistic. Do the last couple of comments because we have now gone over time and it's really hot in here now. Wangi Pagan, how important will Stella Creasy and other pro-EU MPs in the next few parliaments to getting us to rejoin the EU? Very important, and I will tell you this. Labour are already very pro-EU. Most MPs are pro-EU. Most of the shadow cabinet are very pro-EU. Bloody leaders very pro-EU. They're adopting a position because it's electorally necessary, right? The other thing I will say is this. Labour are basically about to double the number of MPs, maybe more. They're about to double the total number of MPs. And a lot of the Labour candidates who are in seats that Labour expect to win, the vast majority of those are pro-EU as well. Remember, Natalie Elphicke isn't actually standing as a Labour MP. The vast majority of Labour candidates that are in the winnable seats are pro-EU. So, although the language is not going to tilt 180 degrees with Labour in government, the attitudes are. The attitudes very much are. But with that slightly more positive note, I will leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good evening, and until next time, I'll see you later.